Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to have you all along to our session today on embedding place-based impact across the public sector through public sector procurement. We predominantly today will be looking at two recent reports that have been launched over the past couple of months. Hacked Social Value of Social Housing 2025, which was released in April, I think. Francis, you can correct me on that if I'm wrong, and LHCPG's annual impact report, which was published yesterday for 25-26. so yeah, good morning. I'm Michael McLaughlin. I'm the Group Head of Social Value at LHCPG, and yeah, we'll go through, I suppose, today's session, really starting off with a bit of a context over the wider sense of social value in public sector, and we'll look at some of the outcomes that have come out of those reports, and then we'll look at the alignment to look at best practice to see, are we seeing best practice in social value across public sector procurement, and Francis will be able to give us a bit of an insight into where we could potentially pivot how we are working to ensure that we are delivering best value. So LHC Procurement Group have literally been embedding place-based impact across public sector procurement for 60 years this year. So it's always been hugely important to us. Back in 1966, where we first had a joint meeting of the London boroughs where LHCPG originated. One of the things that we and you can see at the top left-hand side is a snippet of the minutes from that meeting. What we looked to bring in joint buying, so joint buying power didn't just provide financial efficiencies, it gave us the opportunity to increase technical and social standards, and for us that's really key. So yes, technical standards is hugely important with public sector construction, how we're building houses, schools, hospitals, hugely important, but actually how we're interpreting the social improvement that they are making and actually having that at a core purpose is something that's always been important to LHC, and will remain so. In the past 60 years, we've really evolved how we think about social value. We've looked at ways in which, as a not-for-profit organisation, we give back surplus we make to the public sector organisations that they help us create that money. So we give those rebates through what's now called the Community Benefit Fund, and they align to our social value priorities. Those social value priorities have been documented and laid out in 2024 through our social value strategy, where we look at three main areas in which we see impact being delivered across public sector procurement and construction. So that's improving people's lives, so an increase in well-being, so individual well-being. How do we improve the lives of people in our communities? We've got planet and environment, so when we think about the built environment and the huge potential we have to ensure sustainability and fit for purpose properties and construction happens within communities as part of that community, not as an add-on or not something that we're fighting against. So have that kind of alignment between the built environment and sustainability. And the last part is social mobility, kind of traditional social value in procurement, jobs, skills, apprenticeships, and that remains really important. So we see that being delivered in numerous ways, and today, as we launch the annual impact report for LHCPG, we'll look at some of the ways that we've delivered that, or we've certainly worked with our clients for the public sector to deliver that, and why we align that with us. We also, increasingly have a social value kind of advocacy. So we work with and for the public sector to help deliver social value outcomes, but also to help them deliver their social value strategies and develop social value strategies. And it's something that, with increasing number of resources and staff around that we will continue to do. So we work with both clients and suppliers to help social value be considered and delivered strategically rather than a project by project basis. I suppose the kind of end point to where we're at is we've this year launched a new charity as part of our group structure in Lifting Lives, in addition to our existing Lintel Trust charity in Scotland. And they help ensure governance, transparency and delivery of all our charitable causes, funding and social value. So it's, as I say, it's something that's very much part of our group structure. So everything that we've framed today should really come part of that evolution in our understanding that we can't create impact ourselves, but we can work closely with the public sector to ensure that our clients and the appointed companies that called off from our frameworks deliver that impact with and for us. So just to introduce myself a bit more, I'm Michael. I'm the Group Head of Social Value for LHCPG. My background comes in working with and for social housing organisations across the UK for the past 23 years. Today I'm delighted to be joined by a former colleague, Dr. Frances Harkin, who drives forward social value and research at a strategic level across the sector as the head of services at leading charity HACT. I suppose we're delighted not just to be joined today by Frances, but to work closely with HACT in how we deliver and understand social value. HACT are the charity of the social housing sector, but they do have a further reach in that across the public sector and beyond. And following the Social Value Act in 2012, HACT have really majored on social value and have developed the wellbeing methodology, helps measure social value through calculating improvements to people's lives and the long-term impact that brings to people in place. Increasingly, due to UK government legislation, the Social Value Act, Public Procurement Act, organisations now need to maximise and document and understand the impact that can be delivered through public buying power today, as much as we wanted to happen in 1966. And in some sense, social values become synonymous with good procurement, and HACT have developed a methodology and platform to support specific procurement development and community-driven outcomes. And we'll hear Frances will touch upon some of that as we go through the session today. As I mentioned, delighted that yesterday we published our annual impact report. It's our second impact report and shows a level of maturity in the past 12 months, evidencing the ability and role that the public sector and procurement more generally has in facilitating real change, real impact in the communities in which the sector supports. And as a purely public sector framework provider, we've seen real ability to support impact in three key areas through our added value procurement services. So the project called off from our frameworks. So we've seen the clients deliver over £81 million of social value. A lot of that framed around both decarbonisation, our N9 framework, but also through development, so through new build and delivering social housing units. And I think for me is when we look at how legislation in the UK government frame social value as being the added value that public sector procurement can deliver. And I think that's quite a thin lens to look at social value. And I think what we see social value being delivered every day in the construction, the built environment and the communities in which we live. When you build houses, schools, hospitals, you're improving people's lives. So actually, we think it's really key that our clients are able to capture it and measure that. And we're delighted that our impact report starts to show that. It's something that, as I say, is really key for us, but also key for the organisations themselves to be able to champion the work they do and potentially increase kind of commercial and investment opportunities. The second area that we see our ability and we see social value really driven through communities is through our community benefit fund. As I mentioned, as a not-for-profit organisation, we give back a share of our surplus through our community benefit fund to our regional committee partners and the clients that use our frameworks. So in the past year, it's ensured that over £6.2 million in social value has been created in the communities in which our frameworks have been used. And it's something that it's really close to us as an organisation. Certainly internally, much of the conversation and the good news stories that we see and talk about is delivered through our community benefit fund, and we continue to work with clients to not just provide that funding, but to help shape what those projects will look like, help how support clients measure what those outcomes of those projects and deliver some real change through that, which, as I say, £6.2 million of change is really significant. The last area that we've seen kind of tangible outputs in terms of positive impact people is through the way in which we live our own values internally at LHCPG. And this year we've evidenced over £1 million of social value through a range of activities around community volunteering, IT recycling, and I suppose more generally understanding a kind of ESG principles and better managing our environmental footprint. I suppose in terms of kind of key takeaways from the report, I suppose what we've learned that we're able to support our clients to plan and deliver, measure and report upon impact by early intervention. I suppose the earlier that we're able to support clients in that procurement journey, the greater the benefits can bring in terms of social, economic and environmental improvements, where they're built into projects rather than added at the end. We can increase understanding and impact that they create. We can also understand or increase the amount of data we have to report upon. So something that it really is for us a takeaway is that early engagement in all procurement activity ensures maximum impact can be delivered in line with the needs of that particular community. And we know that in terms of place-based organisations, that public sector almost always are, that they have a real potential to deliver that impact in line with community needs, because they know the community needs, they know the people they work with and for, and that's really important. I suppose the other thing is it's worth noting it, and it's noted in Francis's comments, as Francis played a role as critical friend in this report, as she has done with reports across the public sector for the past decade or so, is that there's an increase in maturity in terms of our ability to understand and unpick the impact due to the resources we are providing, the kind of toolkits, guidance, and that more general public sector advocacy that's really important for us. And we want to place ourselves in that role. We think that no one delivers social value in silos. So actually, if we can work closer with clients and suppliers, we're able to do that. And I think that's something that we see ourselves being able to do in terms of how we've evidenced that through the report, something that's really key to us. So Francis, I know we'll unpick some of the alignment between our report and some of the outcomes and findings in that, and that more general good practice. But I don't know if you've got any, I suppose, initial thoughts or overviews on the alignment of sector impact and the social value of social homes report that you were involved in 2025.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thank you very much for having me along today. And I think just because you have this slide up and a quote from me, I suppose just really wanted to add to what you've already said and highlight that LHC and certainly other procurement providers really do have a role to play in both facilitating that social value, so facilitating contractors and commissioners to create and deliver that social value directly, but also through your direct delivery of your charities and your community benefit funds as well. So I think that's really something that came out when we've been working with you over the past few months to critically review the report. So certainly something to keep in mind. And I think the roles that yourselves as a kind of procurement organisation, but the attendees, I think looks like there's potentially a mix of both commissioners, but also contractors in the attendees. Collectively, you all have that role to play in delivering that place-based transformation, really, and that's where social value and impact measurement really comes to play, I think. And measuring impact well really demonstrates what's working and what's not working, and that very much was the focus for HAC's report that was published in April, really how the sector is considering social impact measurement, but then actually what does it look like in practice. And I know you've got a few slides in a moment which go into some of that in a bit more detail in terms of some of that alignment, but I think the key thing is to think about the collective roles that we all have to play in delivering impact for the beneficiaries, essentially the residents and the communities in which we all work.
Excellent, Francis, thank you very much. I think, as Francis referred to the slides that to come, that we pulled out 4 key areas that we think that the public sector procurement just now, in terms of maturity, are able to deliver kind of real value in terms of that best practice of social value delivery and measurement, but also where we've seen evidence through our report that we are working towards that, and I suppose we wanted to use those four areas, I suppose, to unpick some of the key elements of what I've mentioned there. So there's things around place, the importance of place, and the role that the public sector have and can deliver in that, and actually how do we ensure we join up procurement to make sure that it's based on the needs of that place and the people who live in that. We've got the kind of credible reporting, something that I know certainly Francis and HACT have done a lot of work on that. How do we ensure that social value reporting is at the heart of procurement when we think about the Public Procurement Act and the move away from most advantageous tender, most economically advantageous tender to most advantageous tender, the importance that we are measuring the overall procurement activity as a kind of wider business case than just what the costs are, and actually ensuring that when we are reporting on social value that makes up part of that we're doing that in a way that is as credible as financial reporting. So we'll touch upon that. I suppose another bit about when we think about the finances of it all, the cost of social value, who pays for social value, is something that's come out of not just our report and HACT, which certainly did, but we know that Constructing Excellence are doing a lot of work around that, the economics of social value, and actually something that Francis and I will touch on today, but there will be a further and more in-depth deep dive into that in a webinar with Drew from HACT, Rebecca Rees from Travers Hamlin, and Alison Nichol from Constructing Excellence, which really look forward to, because we know it's one of the kind of sector challenges, how we account for social value and how we make sure that there's a transparency and understanding across all those parties that we've mentioned in the delivery of social value. And the last part links hugely to that, is about collaboration, that we don't deliver social value alone, and what are the things that we need to consider to do that properly. So we'll look at those 4 key areas over the next half hour, and hopefully if there's any thoughts you guys have or any questions you want to ask, if you stick it in the questions and answer or in the chat, and Francis and I will get to that at the end. So thank you. So the first bit is social value, and for me, social value is the benefits that are brought to people and communities, the impact of the work we do in construction. Now, that's all well and good, but actually, when we talk about impact, impact is the value that social value has to people, and that has to be based upon the needs of local people, and we've seen that procurement creates the most value when it strengthens the place that people live, and not just focusing on the projects where money is spent. Francis, I don't know if in terms of place-based and a lot of the metrics you guys used, look at that, if it's worth unpicking that slightly more.
Yes, I suppose just to give a very, very whistle-stop tour of our methodology, just for anyone that's not familiar, we do have at HACT what we call the social value bank, so a range of outcomes that essentially have monetised proxy values attached, which are used across the sector and elsewhere to measure impact. And all of our banks live on an online platform, Social Value Insight, and HACT can essentially look in the background how our outcomes measures are being used. And as stated here on the slide, one of the outcome, and a number of the outcomes, but specifically around community engagement and a particular outcome about feeling belonging to their neighbourhood, is certainly being used widely across the sector, which really demonstrates that the type of activities that the social housing sector, local authorities, and kind of the wider ecosystem around that is really looking to deliver on, I suppose, better community cohesion, better community engagement, but also people having pride and feeling part of that community as well. So that certainly came through in the research, and I'm sure Mike will be able to share a link to the HACT report if you've not already read it, but it certainly goes into a bit more detail about some of the other outcomes that have come through, but it certainly really demonstrates that it's a key area of interest for the sector, and I'm sure the residents as well that we're working with. And I suppose the HAT methodology really focuses on changes to people's lives, so thinking about the impact on life satisfaction so taking that particular outcome, in particular changes to life satisfaction as a result of feeling more belonging to the neighbourhood, and the knock-on health benefits. That's what's captured within the HAT methodology. And we also have an exchequer value as part of our banks as well, which really captures so when someone's feeling better connected to the neighbourhood, taking this as an example, there's a real evidence reduction in demand on the NHS and DWP, for example. So the outcomes bring all of that together and really show what change that has on the individual and how they feel in their life. And HAC's wider, I suppose, ethos and focus, not just on social value, but across all of our work, is really about highlighting the value of place-based working and place-based delivery, and really ensuring that delivery and social value and impact measurement is built around what a community actually needs, and not just having a generic checklist. So that's very much where our thinking around social value and how it should be applied comes into fore.
Excellent, Francis. I think one of the things that I pulled out of our impact report is that actually when you think about the most valued outcome for social housing organisations this year, it has been the feeling of belonging to neighbourhood. And for me, it's that, I mentioned it before, actually within our frameworks themselves, delivering social housing units is the highest social value that we create. And that's, for me, not just about the built environment, but actually it's about the impact that the built environment can have on people in place. So it's really important that when we think about social value being delivered from two ways in procurement, one, the core component of us building those houses actually has the potential to really improve lives. But then you've also got any added social value. So what's the added community benefit or social value clause attached to a public sector contract? And that's where you think the core component of building a house that makes someone part of a community, but then actually what are those other things, those softer things that you can do around the contracts to help someone be part of that? And we've seen some great examples, and we've highlighted them in the impact report, particularly an approach taken by Live West on the Trinity estate through our Southwest Procurement Alliance. And they really included elements of delivery and added social value aligned to specific needs highlighted within a specific community estate. And for me, that's where the potential that the public sector organisations have to know what some of those things are, to have touch points with people that live there, and then to deliver upon it. In procurement really is a lever to do that. And we're seeing that increasingly, and we're seeing that being delivered through mechanisms that construction has to help build that place in those neighbourhoods, but done best when you're aligning it with some of the softer activities and approaches. And I think that's, for me, something that's worth pulling out. And if you look at our social impact report, always the most important and interesting parts are the stories. And social value numbers are great and they underpin that, but actually it's really important that we think about people's lives, the improvement to people's life, and not just the social value numbers as such, which takes us on to the second part of that key takeaways. And for me, it's about credible reporting. As I mentioned before, the Procurement Act mandates improved interpretation of value, but actually, how are we evidencing that we're delivering on that value rather than just delivering numbers on a page? And I think being able to tell that story is really important as well. Francis, I know in terms of the quote we pulled from your report, that it's something that chimes with the view of HACT, is that the huge 1.2 billion, which is ridiculously significant, but that only tells part of the story.
Yes, I think that's something I think it very much connects to the point that you made at the end of the previous slide about social value figures. I very much talk about them as being part of the puzzle and not the only piece of the puzzle. So case studies and other data that you hold as organisation all needs to be considered as part of the puzzle. But social value data definitely has a role to play in terms of showing that impact and I suppose identifying areas for improvement or kind of what's working well. And I think to the point on the slide about it only telling part of the story. So that's really because the figures we've reported in our report really reflects organisations that are using structured measurement, and we know that not everyone is using or measuring impact in a consistent way as organisations. There might be pockets of good practice within organisations, but we know that as a sector, so taking that wider ecosystem, housing associations, local authorities, contractors, that procurement organisations, that sort of full ecosystem, we know that this collective is creating far more impact, but not necessarily capturing it or reporting it in a way that's meaningful or accessible. And I think credibility matters more than ever, because data, in particular around impact and social value, it's not just for comms purposes anymore, and I think it has been in the past. It's really showing up now in governance conversations, funding discussions, and increasingly informal assurance processes as well. Certainly an ongoing conversation that we're having at HACT about audits and assurance and what that needs to look like in practice. And again, happy to pick that up later or separately if organisations are interested in talking to us a bit more about our thinking on that. But one thing we are hearing from the partners we work with in the sector is boards are really asking, how do we actually know that the figures are real and they mean something and they're not plucked out of the air, etc. And I think just kind of linking back to HAC's methodology, the evidence requirements for applying the outcomes are quite clear. It's either based on record data, so thinking apprenticeships or adaptations or maintenance activities for properties. It either has or hasn't happened, so very binary, and that's evidence that can be used. But survey-based data, so looking at tracking progression and change, and that really captures that meaningful impact to the individual and the impact that has on their life, and that really needs to underpin evidence and impact reporting. And I think, Michael, we've certainly had this conversation about the need for organisations to consider what, using the HACT language, indicative and actual social value. So where there's some information, even if it's anecdotal or otherwise, and it's showing an indication that impact has been delivered, that's so important, and the story that should be told. But actual social value, actual data is based on actual evidence. So having that narrative to talk about indicative and actual, I think is really important to make clear to boards and others actually what's real and what's based on assumptions. And I suppose where this is heading really, we're seeing that evidence, this type of evidence, actual evidence, really matters to funders and lenders, not just for reporting, but I suppose part of how borrowing terms get decided, and that's not hypothetical either. We're talking to a number of housing associations in particular who've already secured reductions in interest rates on sustainability linked loans because they've evidenced their social value performance and used that as part of the conversations with funders and lenders. So it really demonstrates that evidence is important internally for decision making, for boards, for governance, but then also as part of external strategic sector-wide discussions as well.
Absolutely. It's interesting. So I was going to make a point and say, I often think that people deliver social value for three key reasons. One is because they've got a moral imperative to do so, and I think from the public sector, we're a sector who are born of social purpose. So how do you deliver against that social purpose? When you think about commercial organisations would measure the success of a project by how profitable it is. Actually, if you don't build 50 social homes to be profitable, you build them because it meets a local need and it meets the need of a housing shortage and improve lives. How do we measure that? So in terms of if we're reporting that for a business case for boards or for customers, actually ensuring we've got metrics to do that, to back up, have real metrics. Again, so you've got moral imperative, you've got legislation. So how do we show that we are meeting the requirements of the Procurement Act actually by having those reporting metrics? Yeah, the case studies, it's the most important thing to understand impact, but actually to be able to evidence it, having those reporting metrics and credible ones. And the last one is that commercial leverage, and so that might be receiving better interest rates because you've got sustainability linked loans or ESG bonds, but also for the appointed companies that you guys work with, for them to deliver social value. Actually, it can help them receive investment if they can display their social value or environmental credentials, and we do that through social value reporting. So we work closely with the appointed companies, particularly because that's who we have the contract with. And what we're trying to deliver is a range of kind of lightweight reporting mechanisms that show they're meeting the kind of industry standard evidence base. So as Francis talked about in terms of HACT, other ones who use TOMS, actually making sure that we're not just delivering numbers on a page, we are providing reporting mechanisms that help them measure the impact towards that. We use as a kind of North Star our social value strategy. So social value wheel, which was on one of the slides earlier, that looks at improved well-being, planet, environment, and social mobility. And actually, if you can evidence progress with any of the outcomes that sit within that, then you're providing evidence of real social impact. I think that's really important. It's important because the appointed companies need a lightweight way to do that. If they're, what we say is early engagement between client and suppliers help not just deliver social value, but put in place mechanisms to measure it. Some of that stuff will be about the supplier saying to the clients, you guys, actually, what are you able to collect? What are your touch points with the people who this project will involve? Now, if that's a decarb project that's PAS compliant, actually there might be a retrofit, or there will be a retrofit coordinator on site. What data are they picking up to make sure that people are now able to heat their homes over winter, and actually then using that as an evidence requirement to meet some of those industry standards, kind of longitudinal researched outcomes that Francis has mentioned. That then shows good procurement, it shows improved lives, and it shows alignment to our strategic outcomes and priorities. So actually it's almost a win-win. So we can report upon it, and then the clients and suppliers, they have the evidence that they are meeting those social value requirements too. Now, as I say, doing good is the best partners, but actually it's really important when we start to unpick, meet compliance and prove that we are meeting these responsibilities, that we're able to evidence it. And for us, working in that kind of continued partnership with organisations like HACT help almost keep us honest around how we are going to do that, and the maturity of the resources we are providing, the support we're providing, and the language we are using as a public sector advocate to do that kind of long term. So yeah, I think it's something that is important. It's something that increasingly, as social value becomes part of everyday business as usual, that we'll need to do. We'll need to have that level of assurance. So you'll need to have metrics that are being used on that. So it's something we'll continue to work with the public sector around. And if anyone wants to know a bit more about that, or about, for us, every specific framework has a specific social value guide, which looks at, here are the outcome areas that we think show progress in this framework more generally. Now, we don't hold appointed companies or clients to that. If they've got other areas where they think for them show that progress, we would encourage them to use that. But it's something for us that we'll continue to develop these framework guides to help social value be very meaningful around specific activity and have an evidence base that helps us do that. I suppose, notwithstanding the challenges that it has to report upon it, I suppose going back to a point raised earlier, actually in delivering social value, it sounds kind of straightforward, but often what we see, not just in terms of the credibility of social value claims, for a contract, to win a contract, it's easy to say, yeah, we're going to deliver £50 million of social value, we're going to 100 apprentices on that job. But actually, for every line within that tender submission, really there's a cost applied to that. And for me, I think it's important that we think about, how do we make sure that we are able to deliver social value, but with an understanding that it doesn't happen on its own. Francis, I know again it's something that really did come out of that social value for social housing report, and I think there's a quote, and it's I think Lord Agnew's quote around, a pound of public money spent without achieving social value is a pound wasted. And for me, I think that's amazing in so many levels. But actually, unless we understand how that pound's been spent or who spent it, actually I'll be able to characterise what impact it's created. I think it's, for me, something that's an ongoing challenge to the sector. I think you have mute on, Francis. I'm not sure.
Apologies, technology. I was just going to say there's a few things that come to mind listening to you kind of share your thoughts there initially, Michael. I think in terms of costs, there's a few things. There's certainly the financial cost in terms of how that is codified or considered by both commissioners, but also the delivering contractors as well, and how that is built into bids and costs and kind of program delivery as well. And I think the conversation that's happening with Rebecca, Drew, and the other colleague in September, I think would certainly go into that in a lot more detail. But I think the key thing really to keep in mind that is the cost of social value. It's priced in somewhere, whether that's directly through line items or indirectly overhead or margin, or as a cost to the buyers or commissioners. It's a key issue that we do come up across it quite often, and it's often a feature of our social value conversations and conferences as well. Like what does this look like in practice? And I think ignoring that or not really understanding what the cost is, I think can certainly have an impact, distorting the market. So thinking bigger bidders can certainly spread costs across kind of bigger portfolios of work, whereas smaller organisations or kind of micro enterprises are potentially at a disadvantage, and that can certainly have an impact where costs and overall costs and how social value is conceptualised. But I think there's something linking with the quotes on the slide. Social value needs to be meaningful. It really does need to link back to what's the purpose, what's the need, what's the community need, what do the residents of the communities want, and making sure actually what is delivered links back to that, and it's not just something random because someone thought it would be interesting, but it actually speaks to a need. And thinking about that sort of theory of change approach, actually what is the purpose of this activity to deliver social value, and is it actually having an impact? And I think that speaks to that comment and quote around financial investment being wasted. So if actually what's being delivered isn't what's actually needed, it's not really social value, it's not really impactful, and it's not meaningful. So it's probably something that shouldn't have been delivered, something else should have been delivered, but money's been invested in that. So I think it's certainly a few things there in terms of the actual cost, but the cost of not doing it right or doing it well from the outset as well.
I think it's a great point. I think, as I mentioned, we see ourselves as an advocate for public sector, but also for social value. And I think, when you think about that quote, actually, what our impact report showed is the potential that procurement has to deliver real value. And if we're not putting social value at front and centre, and if we're not advocating for that to be done at front and centre, then we're missing a huge amount of value that could be delivered. So actually, regardless of what the costs are, ensuring that we're aligning what those costs are with what the outputs, outcomes, and impact are really key. So when we think about when we score social value submissions, or when our clients score social value submission for tenders, one of the things we encourage is a clear plan and evidence that activity is deliverable and desirable, actually, as you mentioned, but without being able to attribute costs in terms of either real cost of doing business, or the in-kind support, or overheads, or volunteering, whatever the kind of social value you're aiming to deliver, then I don't think we can really make a determination of how deliverable something is. So I think it's really important that we're able to, whether that's a kind of financial cost, or as Francis alluded to, the range of costs that sit around that, it's important that we are able to understand whether a project or whether social value is proportionate and deliverable. And I think for us, as we measure what's realistic, proportionate, and impactful, we kind of need to know that. And value is important, and the cost of social value has to be acknowledged. It obviously shouldn't be the end point, and for us, we want to focus on impact to appreciate the value that it can deliver as much as anything else. And I think it's something that, as Francis said, that will be covered off in that specific webinar on the 3rd of September. So along with we'll send out the recording of this and any resources we touch upon in terms of the HACT report and our impact report. We will send a link to the Eventbrite for that session, and you may wish to share with colleagues, and that one, some of that will be quite procurement focused, because it's the cost of social value and procurement as much as social value itself. suppose the last thing, and it's something I know Hacked up a massive on around the social housing sector, is the potential we have to work in collaboration. Something we really value with working with Hacked and with wider sector partners is that not just collaboration between kind of experts, but actually that place-based collaboration is really important. I think that I've said a couple of times that we don't deliver social value in silos, so it's really important that that we look at how we can maximise that to take on board some of the kind of best practice that Hacked have pulled out of their report. Francis, any reflections on that?
Yes, so thinking about the work that we do around social value, but also in our community investment space, we often see or hear housing associations and local authorities in the exact same area, so thinking geographical area, running their running the same types of programs or wanting to deliver the same type of social value activities, and also having their own procurement processes as well. And each of these organisations asking contractors, usually the same contractors often, for a different flavour of social value contribution. So that creates duplicated effort and can often dilute the impact that could otherwise land in one place. And I think that potential disconnect between organisations, but also within organisations as well. Again, thinking about the conversations we have across the sector, there's often siloed working within organisations as well, creating duplicated efforts and I suppose reducing the impact that collective resources within an organisation can have in terms of how they commission and deliver services and ask for social value contributions. So I think there's a real need to think about where organisations in the full sector can work better together. So thinking about social value commitments and delivery, but also that procurement process as well, very much in kind of your space to speak to that in particular, I think, Michael. But I think something else to note is thinking, I suppose, regulatory dimensions. So think about recent standards around neighbourhood and community outcomes. They all depend on collaboration and place-based delivery. So not just working in silo or isolation, and collectively as a sector, we can certainly have more meaningful impact for residents and communities by working together. I think just tying up a couple of the points we've made across the slides today already, good impact measurement and good place-based practice really do go together, and without genuine collaboration you'll often get that fragmented delivery that looks fine on paper but actually isn't having that impact in people's lives. And I suppose the role that LHC can certainly play as that facilitator of good social value, meaningful social value, is bringing together people that could collaborate on those social value commitments through frameworks and procurement processes.
Excellent, Francis. Thinking about something you said earlier on about the importance of language, and I think this for me plays out in this part as well. So when we think about the role that we have, and I'm thinking about our report and what we report upon social impact, actually, not one party delivers that social value in itself. So we facilitate a lot of that interaction between client and supplier. We provide the products to help them, deliver houses and decarbonisation, and they work with appointed companies who we've highlighted as being good values. They have that kind of environmental outcomes, and so we're almost aligning that kind of social value ecosystem for them to be delivered. But we don't do it ourselves, to claim social value. So it's about facilitating and advocating for this social value delivery. And I think, what you said, that means you don't have that fragmented approach. You have everyone understanding social value in the same terms and delivering that together. And I think for me, it's really, really important. I suppose when you think about the role that we have in terms of being place-based, so you've got those organisations we work with who are place-based organisations, but actually, LHC PG, one of the things that come out in our report is that we benefit from being able to understand and interpret local needs and deliver products that speak to local needs. So we've got some frameworks that are region specific, but also those framework metrics that we measure on the social value of specific frameworks. They're taking into account actually what are the regional variances, and what you have rural organisations who will the reason why they'll deliver retrofitting properties might be different for urban, and similar to various frameworks. But so it's really important that we think about those different drivers to that, and actually by having regional business units, so we've got Scottish Procurement Alliance, Northern Procurement Alliance, Southwest Procurement Alliance, LHC in London and Midlands, and we've got Welsh Procurement Alliance. Actually, we've got all of that, so we're understanding that we're very much in line with that place-based approach, and it helps us build again a kind of ecosystem of social value that understands, you guys know your people best, but actually here's what we think are that kind of the themes that you might want to measure, and it goes back to delivering kind of resources and tools that help them measure the social value. And I think for me that's I suppose hugely key in all of that. We want to work with the sector, we want to work with partners like HACT, and we want to work with clients and suppliers who all speak that similar language of improving lives and places, and if we can corral that around a kind of social value ecosystem, that's certainly something that we will do, and we do on a kind of weekly basis, and something that our social value report pulls out, and we think it aligns to a lot of the stuff that HACT have been doing, a lot of stuff that the sector are putting forward as good practice.
Michael, if I might just add something just to that discussion
sure.
about collaboration. So something that we often hear at HACT, especially where multiple partners are involved, so thinking LHC as a facilitator, so your frameworks, you've got commissioners who commission work, and then you've got contractors and organisations actually direct delivering activities that create social value. The question of attribution often comes up, and I think that's certainly something to
Absolutely.
be mindful of with collaboration. I think to your point about the importance of language and getting the language right really matters. I think it really echoes there that it's important to attribute social value transparently, and I think that's where being able to talk about it where an organisation's facilitated social value, or whether it's directly delivered social value, or it's commissioned to the activities that have created that impact to residents and communities. I think that's certainly an important part of this bigger discussion as well.
Absolutely. I suppose before we finish off, I think this is hugely important to the wider public sector, but I think specifically the social housing sector, when we think about like our largest kind of flagship social value framework is our N9 decarbonisation framework, and the built environment has a huge potential to improve environmental outcomes, but actually we know that social housing as one block can improve so much of that kind of road to net zero. Actually, that collaborative approach and understanding of that and delivering that at scale is hugely important. And I think that when we think about the public sector, we think about housing association, for me it's about social value delivery at scale, and that's how we're going to, I suppose, maximise that place-based impact, and I think it's again worth labouring on. Now, I realise in terms of kind of timings on, I happen to open up to questions either in the chat or today, or if you want to drop a note, my contact details will be shared after the session. Happy to have a specific conversation, or if there's any general queries about today, but we certainly will issue the recording and any of the resources we've spoken about today. I suppose just to finish up, I think what I've heard today is that there's loads of takeaways of progress, but the sector's maturing. I think we are seeing increasingly, whether that's to do with legislation or whether that's to do with increasing needs of the communities we work in, actually the public sector and there's some public has to be highlighted, and the suppliers we work with are stepping up. They're improving, they're creating more impact, but also they're not just creating it, they're measuring it and reporting upon it, and that's something that we'll continue to mature our approach. And I think it's one of the main themes of our impact report this year is that we have matured, but it's a journey, and we work with leading voices like Francis and the guys at HACT to understand where the next step in that maturity goes. We want to do that to deliver that kind of wider social, economic and environmental benefits, and we know that public procurement is a key way to do that. We also, as for us, it's a route in, to work with communities through our charitable activities as well. But it all starts for us with that engagement with the public sector, engagement with clients like yourself, both in projects but also just in understanding the communities in which you work. And I think we'll continue to develop that approach. We'll continue to develop our understanding of data, of resources, and of support that we can provide you to work together to create that lasting impact for people and places. As I say, following today's session, we will send out a mailing with our report and with hacks, but we'll put in the chat just now, so you'll have that to download our report, which was launched yesterday. And as I say, my contact details are on that and in the chat. Would love to catch up with any of you, and hope that you join ourselves and Hacked with Charles Hamlin and Constructing Excellence on our next webinar on the 3rd of September. Thank you very much.